Hello from Canada. I'm Sam Brown, WDI's country contact for Canada, and I'm going to share with you some recent events in Canada with respect to gender ideology and women's sex based rights. And then I just want to share with you some of the education that is being provided to Canadian educators. Getting started with recent events, the most significant change that has occurred in the past year in Canada was our federal election. Mark Carney is our new prime minister. Unfortunately, this was a further blow to women's sex based rights in Canada. Not only is Mark Carney very much in support of what the Liberals call trans rights, but his own daughter identifies as trans. Our uphill battle became far steeper the moment he won. Carney appointed Reshi Valdez, our new Minister of Wage or Women and Gender Equality. Unfortunately, she will not be likely be of much help to Canadian women at all. WDI Canada did reach out to her after she was appointed to highlight the most pressing issues currently affecting Canadian women and girls, but we did not hear back. She has made her position on women's sex based rights very clear. And her position is that we don't deserve such rights, which really comes as no surprise considering that one of her top advisors is none other than Nathaniel Morin, who is a trans identifying man who competes in women's races. Ms. Valdez is actively contributing, sadly, to female erasure, as evidenced when she addressed Canadian citizens on Menstrual Health Day.
Menstrual health is fundamental to the dignity, well-being, and the human rights of all who menstruate.
I also have here a short clip of Ms. Valdez batting down valid concerns and criticisms as hate and discrimination.
Pride season celebrates the resilience and contributions of the 2S LGBTQI plus community across this country. Yet too many people face hate and discrimination for being themselves. Our new government will provide security funding for their Pride celebrations this year to ensure everyone is safe. We all deserve to live openly, with dignity, and without fear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You'll notice she said there that they are committed to providing additional funds for security at Pride events to keep everyone safe, despite the fact that there are zero examples of violent threats being made at Pride events in recent Canadian history. Women, of course, receive no protection from the government, despite the fact that there are deranged activists that often turn up to our protests and events. Unfortunately, the most protected and important women in Canada are the men, even according to the Minister for Women and Gender Equality. Speaking of Pride parades, we are currently in the middle of Pride season here in Canada. An entire month of celebration just was not enough for our government. They decided that we need an entire season, June through September. During June alone, there were wildly inappropriate parades that were advertised as family friendly in multiple Canadian cities. At the Toronto Pride Parade, a large group of fully nude men walked around at the parade right in front of children whose parents were too worried, evidently, about appearing bigoted to take their children home. In my opinion, the reason why they extended Pride season through September, because if memory serves me correctly, last year it was June through August, but I believe that they wanted to encompass back to school. We've learned in recent years that participation in Pride is mandatory, as was made clear in November of last year when Emo Township, a town of only 1,200 residents, was dragged before the Ontario Human Rights Commission for refusing to fly a Pride flag when the season began in 2020. The HRC forced both the town and its mayor to pay fines and ordered Mayor Harold McQuaker to be re-educated. If this situation weren't absurd enough to begin with, the town hall does not even have a flagpole. And the HRC was made aware of that fact. They have one small flag post, which flies a Canadian flag, but no pole. Either way, this case sent a message to Canadians that participation in Pride season is anything but optional. Moving over now to Alberta, Premier Danielle Smith introduced legislation to protect women's sports and protect trans identifying children from medicalization. Unfortunately, an Alberta judge ordered a temporary injunction earlier this month to block this legislation, stating that these children need to be, get this, protected from irrevocable harm. On the other spectrum, from Premier Smith, politicians in Nova Scotia, one of Canada's wokest provinces, made it known in May of this year that they will be expanding access to what they call gender affirming care for youth, despite all of the evidence that this is the exact opposite of what these kids need. As of May, they had already opened 2 additional gender clinics in the small maritime province. This news came after 2 Canadian reviews were released in March of this year that were in line with the CAS report. As I'm sure most of you are aware by this point, BC nurse Amy Ham was recently found guilty of professional misconduct by the BC College of Nurses and Midwives for making what they referred to as discriminatory statements against transgender people on social media, and for her part in putting up an I Heart JK Rowling billboard in Vancouver. Although they dragged Amy's name through the mud and put her through nearly 4 years of hell, they evidently felt she deserved further punishment and are now going after her for over $160,000. True to form, Amy is not taking this lying down. The Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms announced this week that they will be assisting her as she files complaints against both Vancouver Coastal Health and the BC College of Nurses and Midwives for political discrimination. Quoting Amy's lawyer, Lisa Bildy, this will be an important case to watch. Unlike the UK, Canadian tribunals have not wrestled with the question of whether gender critical views are protected beliefs. Canada should follow suit. Ms. Bildy stated that these regulatory authorities appear to be using their power to discipline and enforce a particular worldview, in this case, gender ideology. She added, this should not be allowed to become the norm. Thankfully, Ms. Ham, with the assistance of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, is pushing back. The JCCF have also put a call out to any parents or caregivers who have been silenced by a Canadian school board. Many Canadian parents, myself included, have been robbed of our charter rights in recent years by school boards that seem to forget that they were put there to represent the parents. If you are one of these parents, they may take your case on if you reach out to them. In positive news for a change, COSBAR has initiated a charter challenge against the Government of Canada on the basis of male inmates being allowed to identify their way into female prisons. This is an issue that most Canadians are unaware of, as our state-funded mainstream media refuses to cover it. Several violent men are currently being housed in women's prisons in Canada. Heather Mason, advocate for incarcerated women, recounts her firsthand experience with a man during her time in prison, as well as the stories of other incarcerated women, in a video posted by Redux. The video can be found on Redux's site and is definitely worth watching in full. I would love to show you the entire video, but in the interest of time, I'll just share with you a short clip.
We had a man, Matthew Harks, who's a prolific serial pedophile who has like hundreds of victims and charges. And he sexually assaulted an Indigenous woman in the bathroom at Grand Valley. And the women found out about it and they locked him out of their house. And he went to the guards and told the guards he was locked out of his house. And the guards came and told the women that they had to allow him into the house. And if they didn't cooperate, that bullying would be put in their paperwork, and their paperwork is what is used when they go up for parole. So then that would be held against them and may even prevent them from getting parole.
It's not just the inmates who are dealing with these creeps. Female prison guards at Leclerc Institution, a women's prison in Quebec, staged a walkout last year because they were being forced to strip search these men who would become erect and make vile comments directed at the female guards. Sadly, the government of Canada forced these women back to work and informed them they had no right not to handle the genitals of these perverts because trans women are women or something. I don't know what you call that besides state sanctioned sexual assault. The funny thing is, when I was searching for this article to verify the details, it seems this entire incident has been scrubbed from the internet. It's as though it never happened, but I can assure you it did. Thankfully, the province of Quebec announced at the end of June that they will no longer be allowing males to self identify their way into female prisons. There have been multiple known cases of men self identifying into Canadian women's shelters in the past few years, but one example from January of this year was particularly enraging. Michael Collins, who goes by Mika Katz, is known to have sexually assaulted at least four women at an Edmonton women's shelter. Again, the mainstream media refuses to acknowledge these instances, leaving the public blissfully unaware that this is happening at all. There are some smaller news outlets that are attempting to push back against the mandatory narrative, but they've been smeared as far right and are now dismissed by a huge percentage of the Canadian population as a result. Each week, when I report the news from Canada, it does feel that it's always a lot of doom and gloom. But the silver lining is that Canadian turfs are strong, and we're not going to just lay down and take this. We will continue fighting, and eventually we will win because we're right. I'll now discuss a bit about education in Canada. Education is a provincial responsibility in Canada, so I can't speak to exactly what's going on in other provinces, but I would be very surprised if it was much different than it is in Ontario, where I'm at. I went back to school and graduated last year from the early childhood education program. And I was frankly appalled at what they are pushing on mostly fairly younger women and what these women are being encouraged to pass along to very young children. I should clarify that I took a program that would qualify me to teach children aged 0 to 6. So basically up to kindergarten. A rational person would believe that the most important things to focus on at this age would be things such as basic math, reading and writing, improving motor skills, and learning to get along with one's peers. First and foremost, we were taught that all of our lessons should be based around what they call anti bias curriculum. While the phrase anti bias sounds harmless enough, anyone who's been paying attention to the way language is being used in the past several years knows that there is much more to it than avoiding bias against children. The four tenets of anti bias curriculum are identity, diversity, justice, and activism. I'll just read an excerpt here from the Government of Ontario website. Anti bias education in Ontario aims to foster inclusive and equitable learning environments by addressing discriminatory biases and systemic barriers within the education system. It involves recognizing and valuing diversity, promoting critical thinking skills, and encouraging inclusive practices across all levels of education. This approach helps students understand and appreciate differences, challenge stereotypes, and work towards a more just and equitable society. That's right. It's the job of preschoolers and kindergartners to work towards a more just and equitable society. Bear in mind that all available data tells us that math and reading scores have been dropping since 2018 in Canada. These kids need to be spending less time ruminating on how they identify themselves in relation to their peers and more time and support spent on the basics of education. There were countless examples of this type of indoctrination, but what blew my mind was that the same teachers who would teach us about how the human brain develops would, with a straight face, tell us that young children know their genders and some may be trans. They would teach us about the importance of imaginative play and how normal it is for young children to pretend to be something other than what they actually are, and about the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision making capabilities and is not fully developed until the mid 20s, but at the same time insists that we must affirm a child's trans identity. Worse still, in order to graduate, we all had to take a mandatory anti oppression course. During one of the first classes, my professor pulled up the oppression chart. Under sexism, it read, women and trans women. I was unable to hold my tongue, and I went on a rant that lasted several minutes, one of many rants that I would go on in that class, about the fact that gender ideology is 100% based on stereotypes and that no man experiences misogyny, no matter how he chooses to express himself. To my surprise, not only did the class receive my words very well, the professor approached me after class and said that she was really glad I was saying what I was saying because she agreed, but she was not able to say so. I felt that that was quite telling. While education is a provincial responsibility, the Government of Canada released the Trans Affirming Toolkit in early 2024, which was a reference guide for Canadian teachers, which cites a host of deranged activists as experts, including Alok Vaid-Menon, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the pervert who said, quote, "These days, the narrative is that transgender people will come into bathrooms and abuse little girls. The supposed purity of the victim has remained stagnant. There are no princesses. Little girls are also kinky. Your kids aren't as straight and narrow as you think." End quote. The toolkit heavily encourages teachers to use the unlearn gender zebra, the gender unicorn, the gender snow person for young children, and the gender and sexuality galaxies for kids aged 12 to 17, among many other materials. All of these materials basically suggest that if children fail to adhere to rigid sexist stereotypes, they may be born in the wrong body. Outside of school, our government is constantly working to indoctrinate Canadian children with children's shows on CBC News and elsewhere that feature stories about trans kids and non binary identities, as well as an array of other nonsense meant to confuse children early and often. Here's a clip from a CBC Kids show. Bear in mind that CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, is funded by the Canadian government. They air only what would be approved by the Liberal government. Here it is.
I love to run and play basketball with my friends. And I like to get dirty. But I am not a boy. I'm a girl. I like to play basketball too. I like to play dress up and wear dresses and put jewelry on. I want my hair to grow down to my toes. I was born a boy, but I am a girl. I like to put jewelry on too. That's so much fun. Some days I'm a girl, some days I'm a boy. I like playing with dolls, and I'm great at playing soccer.
I feel it's very clear when watching that video that it is aimed at very young children. There's just no question about it. There are also other shows, such as The Fabulous Show with Faye and Fluffy, which airs on the Family Channel and is a show for small children hosted by two drag queens. And here's another example of what is being pushed at Canadian kids.
Another aspect of inclusion at Pride has to do with kids and families. Some people have complained that the parades aren't family friendly.
Usually, when a parent is uncomfortable for their child, they're really uncomfortable for themselves. And they're thinking it's uncomfortable for their child.
Agriculture doesn't need to be sanitized to be made kid friendly.
Many large Pride weeks do include family-oriented events, and many kids and families participate every June.
So I think that organizers are trying to be real sensitive and helpful, but at the same time, Pride is for the people in our community. And so to tell people in our community they can't celebrate themselves in the way they want to celebrate would be a disservice to them, because that's what pride is really about.
Notice that he says that it is a family-friendly event and parents' worries are basically their own biases. And also that those in attendance shouldn't be expected to tone it down for children. Both of those things can't be true. Either it's family friendly or it isn't. And it's quite clear that the latter is the case. So, Canadian news is very often quite depressing when it comes to gender ideology and women's sex based rights. But I do have a hopeful anecdote to leave you with. It doesn't seem that the government is having as much success as they would have hoped with indoctrinating children, at least when it comes to preteens and teens. As the mother of a 14-year-old daughter who just graduated from elementary school and the friend of many women of children in and around that age, I can say confidently that a very large number of these kids just don't seem to be buying gender ideology. My daughter says the kids at her school roll their eyes and outright reject this nonsense. She's also had multiple teachers say things like, let's just get through this because I have to teach you what's in the curriculum when it comes to teaching them gender ideology. Most of my friends, with a couple of exceptions, say their kids report the same tone from their schools. Of course, I can only speak to what I'm seeing and being told, and things may be very different in other areas of this vast country. But as far as I can tell, a lot of these kids are just tired of having this garbage shoved down their throats at every turn. So, as much as Canada seems to be irrevocably lost at this point, there does seem to be some hope for the future. The kids may just be all right after all. And that's all I've got. Have a great day.